This is a story about how I learned about my grandfather, Morris Hertle. I wanted to learn more about his background and the family and place he came from. It's a story that shows how even small details can lead to big discoveries. Growing up, I never really knew any of my four grandparents, and neither of my parents recalled much about where their parents were from. My parents called me a typical American mutt. You see, my dad's parents were both born in Ireland, while my mom's parents were both born in Germany. My dad's parents were both from Ireland, from two neighboring rural counties. My grandmother Nellie was from Ballygeher in County Leitrim. When my wife Debbie and I honeymooned, it was a special treat to see the cottage where she was born and where she grew up, and to meet relatives. But it took a lot of research to discover that my grandfather Michael was from Rahara in County Roscommon, in a townland called Barnacullen. The ruins of the Killian fireplace are still visible today. On my mother's side, I grew up hearing her tell stories about her parents. She told of their lighthearted bickering over correct German pronunciations. That's because they came from two different parts of Germany. She told how her mother, Mathilda, was from Westphalia in Germany's northwest. In learning about Mathilda, we discovered an American relative who had already learned quite a bit about her, including that she was from the small town of Ovaltine. He had even visited her family's farm, less than a mile outside of the town. And he brought back a picture of Mathilda as a young girl. So we knew the story of my grandmother from Ovaltine, Germany. That's the way things stood for many years. Happy to have learned the coming to America stories of three of my grandparents. That left one big mystery, that of my German grandfather, Mathilda's husband, Morris Hertle. He passed away years before I was born, and there was very little info to go on. My mother, her brother, and sisters talked about their dad, but could supply only a few clues about where he was from. They said he was from Bavaria, in the south of Germany. But Bavaria is a big place, the largest state in Germany. He had talked about seeing the Alps from where he lived, so he must have been from the south of Bavaria. She also told how they loved seeing him do the Bavarian slap dance, as demonstrated by these gentlemen. The usual sources, census, birth records, and so on, told us about the Hertle family and some of their history in Chicago. And how they had moved to several different homes. But nothing revealed any more about where Morris was originally from. My mom said her dad spoke of a relative named Hummel. But did we even have his name right? My mom recalled visits by some relative whose name she didn't remember, who worked at Ovaltine. The two men talked about whether they should use their original German names. So was his original name really Morris, which isn't really a Bavarian name, or something else? For that matter, was Hertle his correct last name in Germany? So who is Morris Hertle? Where did he come from? One evening, Debbie and I were watching a TV program about German immigrants to Chicago. We learned that for many new German Catholic arrivals, St. Joseph Church near Orleans and Division was their center of community life. I checked the census records and discovered that the Hertle family's address was just a short 3-block walk to St. Joseph Church. That was intriguing enough to warrant a search of St. Joseph's baptismal records. Sure enough, 3 of Morris's children were baptized there. Best of all, the baptismal records in this church were unusually detailed. Besides the usual name, date, and names of the parents, these records also gave the hometowns of the baby's parents. And that's how we learned that Morris Hertle was from Kaufbeuren, a town in Bavaria about 50 miles west of Munich, with a history going back 900 years. And yes, you can see the Alps from there. We now knew the place, leaving the question, who was Morris's family? Some years later, in 2000, our family took a long-planned vacation to Europe, including Bavaria. Naturally, there was one town we just had to see. What town is this?
Kaufbeuren.
Oh, you say that so well. In the center of town is St. Martin's Church, which Morris must have known well.
This is from my great-grandfather.
While in Kaufbeuren, we learned the location of the town records office.
He's the guy that helped us.
And we got to meet with Dr. Stefan Fischer, the town archivist. Despite searching, he didn't find anything specifically concerning a Morris Hertle in Kaufbeuren. But he did have us examine a book that is pretty unique to Germany, a Familienbuch, or family book. This combines a whole variety of vital records in one place, but organized by family. There were about a dozen entries for people named Hertle, some spelled the way we spell it, so that was promising. But one entry in particular stood out. That was a record of a marriage between a man named Hertle and a woman named Hummel, the name that my mother recalled might be a name in our family. That entry tells us that Anton Hertle was born in nearby Schwabmünchen, and Maria was born in nearby Eggenthal. At some point they moved to Kaufbeuren, where they lived until Maria died at 79 and Anton at age 86. This record also gives us the names of their parents. Anton's parents were Johann Hertle and Susanna Strohmeyer. And Maria's parents were Anton Hummel and Agnes Schindler. The record doesn't tell of any children of Anton and Maria living with them in Kaufbeuren, but we have to wonder, could they be Morris's parents and my grandparents? So now the search was on to try to learn about this family and if they were indeed connected to our Morris. For years after that, I tried to find out more about any of these 6 people without success. At last, in 2018, I found listings online from a Wintergerst family in present-day Bavaria. They traced their ancestry back to a Crescenz Hummel, who was born just a few years apart from Maria, and who, like Maria, was born in Eggenthal. A major eye-opener was that Crescenz's parents were a Franz Anton Hummel and Agnes Schindele. It sure began to look like our families were related. Maria and Crescenz could well be sisters, and Anton and Agnes their parents. If so, did the Wintergersts know anything about Maria? I got in touch with the family, and they sent over their genealogy files with a database of over 1,500 names. Unfortunately, it had nothing about Maria, so there was nothing to prove that connection of possible siblings, Maria and Crescenz. But looking elsewhere in that huge database, I found a surprise. Crescenz Hummel married a man named Joseph Martin, and they had a daughter, Joanna. She grew up to marry a Franz Joseph Wintergerst, and they lived in Kaufbeuren. They had 3 children named Michael, Johann Baptist, and Franz Joseph Jr., also known as Frank. Now Michael died young at only 20. Johann Baptist married and raised 2 boys right there in Bavaria. Frank, however, took a different path. Browsing that database, it became clear that Frank Wintergerst emigrated to America. With this big clue, the next step was to check the U.S. immigration and census records. Sure enough, records at Ellis Island tell us that at the age of 26, Frank had left Kaufbeuren and traveled north to the seaport of Hamburg. From there, he boarded the steamship Ohio and arrived in New York on September 9, 1923. Next, from the U.S. Census, we discover that Frank had married and started a family. They lived in Villa Park, Illinois, where Frank was listed as a carpenter in a food products factory. Well, if you worked at a food manufacturer in Villa Park, almost certainly that meant one thing: Ovaltine. Villa Park pretty much grew up around the Ovaltine factory, which was built in 1917. Ovaltine even built Villa Park's first post office due to the huge volume of mail received from Ovaltine's promotional offers on radio. Villa Park and Ovaltine thrived together for some 7 decades. So now we had a match to my mom's story about a visit to her dad from a relative who worked at Ovaltine. If Morris really was the son of Anton and Maria, then Morris and Frank were first cousins once removed. They came from the same town and surely would have known their common relatives. It's so easy to imagine Frank in his mid-30s going to visit his uncle, Morris Hertle, his mom's cousin, a man some 30 years his senior, and them talking about the old days and their families back in Germany. Frank lived in the house he built in Villa Park with his wife Marie and their 3 children, and he remained there for the rest of his days. As tantalizing as this all was, we still needed hard proof. First, Elizabeth Wintergerst in Bavaria and I compared our DNA tests, and we confirmed that we are indeed related. But was Morris really the son of Anton Hertle and Maria Hummel? It was time to get some help from an expert in Germany who could find and read the very challenging script used in old church and civil records. With this, we found a bonanza of details, and finally it all came together. Schwabmünchen is a small town about 20 miles north of Kaufbeuren, and that's where Anton Hertle was born in 1832, the son of Johann Hertle and Susanna Strohmeyer. Only about 5 miles northwest of Kaufbeuren is Eggenthal, and Maria Hummel was born there in 1829, the daughter of Franz Anton Hummel and Agnes Schindele. It was there in Eggenthal, probably here at St. Afra Church, that Anton and Maria were married on November 5, 1861. The witnesses at their wedding were their two fathers. Seven years later, on February 13, 1869, they were blessed with the arrival of their son, Moritz Hertle. When Moritz was 5 years old, the family moved to Kaufbeuren. So that's the story of Moritz Hertle, a son of Bavaria, who left his homeland to come to America, where he started our family.